But this is the biggest part of this recession proofing your marketing spend is making sure you don't cut your brand building activities, because long-term growth only comes from brand building activities.
You're listening to Build Up, the Homebuilder podcast, brought to you by ZGM.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Santana.
I'm a home building marketer, brand strategist, and your host of the Build Up podcast.
And I'm a digital marketer and the executive producer of Build Up.
And together, we love applying our expertise to the home building industry. Join us as we uncover industry insights, chat with colleagues, and explore exciting ways to push the home building world forward.
So, Jordan, today on the podcast, we have one of our very own from ZGM, one of our founding partners, Rob Fairhead. He is our chief strategist, has a lot of really great experience in the market, and is a reliably level head in some sometimes inflammatory conversations. So I'm excited to have him on the podcast today to chat about maybe inopportune or different economic circumstances. So welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Santana. And Jordan.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Rob. We're going to take what would normally be just office conversation, and why not record it and put it online?
Absolutely. We have these conversations all the time. So this is just normal for us.
We've got an interesting topic that we want to talk to you about today. You as our chief strategy officer at the agency. We want to talk about sort of marketing through a recession. And that's kind of a big, scary word. And depending on where you are in North America, I think that's going to look a little bit different. And actually, I talked about this earlier with Santana. I feel like I just want to use slow down maybe instead of the R word, because the R word is pretty scary.
I like that. I think depending who you talk to, a recession is imminent, could be coming in the fourth quarter of this year, or it may not be coming at all. And I should probably preface today's discussion by saying I'm not an economist. I don't present myself as such, but I do keep tabs on the economy. And I think a marketing agency is also a pretty good barometer for the economy. And I think what we're seeing, one would argue even in this segment, that some of that slowdown has already started to happen. I think, our governments in North America are taking steps to slow down the economy, whether it doesn't really matter what label we put on it. And with spiking interest rates, we're starting to see a slowdown in home building, and we're starting to see a slowdown in traffic through sales centers and deals signed and, longer sales cycles. So whatever the label it is, I think, we're in the midst of it now, and I think it's going to be a continuing trend for 2023.
I think one caveat it's important that we put on this too, for transparency of our listeners and to kind of frame the conversation a bit, is that our bread and butter is really production builders, which is to say that, a specialty builder might get value out of this conversation, but we're really speaking to the audiences that will be around. It's less fearful of safety and more about what does a slowdown or a changing look like, rather than, necessarily a big risk. Would you say that that's fair, Rob and Jordan?
I think so. Oh, just like we do in the office, Jordan. We're speaking over each other.
We both just want to answer the question. We're so ready.
I know. I would agree. I think that it's almost regardless of your industry, audiences are going to feel a slowed economy. So even if it's a custom home builder versus a production home builder, your audience will be going on a journey, an economic journey, and you need to go on it with them. But I do agree that it will affect those two types of builders in different ways.
To the point that Santana made, our bread and butter and focus is on sort of more production builders, and where volume is an issue, and hitting certain targets for the year is very important. And it is going to hit them differently. And so one of the places I wanted to start with this conversation with you, Rob, was just sort of around the customer journey, and specifically, your thoughts around the customer journey, how that is impacted in a recession, a slowdown, and what that sort of means for the home builder audience, and specifically sort of that production builder audience who is all about that volume.
Yeah, for sure. I think, makes sense to start any marketing discussion with the customer. And it's probably worth saying, when the economy like this is starting to slow, your customers don't go away. There's still people buying homes. There's still triggers in their lives that are happening where they're having babies, they're migrating intraprovincially. I think that those things are still happening, and it's just kind of meeting them where their heads are at while they're through that purchase journey. And granted, there may be less buyers in the market, and certainly what that means is there's increased competition. So, one of the things that I like to say when the market gets like this is it's not really a buyer's market or a seller's market, it's a marketer's market. And I think when specifically when you talk about the customer journey, again, because not all customers are the same, I don't know if the customer journey is always the same. I was reading an article recently, and it provided audience segmentation through a recession. And I think there's two important things to take away from that. One is when your audience changes like this due to external forces, I think resegmenting them is probably a really smart thing to do. Your audience from 2 years ago might not be the same as they are today. So consider looking at a resegmentation. And that doesn't need to be an expensive exercise. It doesn't need to, require a third-party research partner, but just having a look at who's buying and maybe asking a few more questions through the sales center or through the sales process to get a sense of where your audience is at. But back to what I was saying, this article segmented audiences into 4 different groups through a recession, and I liked where they got to, and it landed on, audience number 1, slam on the brakes. People that, when they see these warning signs of the economy, they stop everything. Maybe not everything. They need to buy their necessities, but it's really, that's where their focus is buying the necessities. And then there's another audience group called pained but patient, which they're still going to go through with these purchases and large purchases like a home, but they are going to sweat every detail. Their sales cycle might be double or triple what it was previously. And then there's the next group, which is comfortably well off, and kind of the same thing, but might be a little bit more accelerated. They're still going to really be value shopping, but probably value shopping more than price shopping. And then lastly, there's the live for today audience, which they're going to keep spending. Maybe they all have independent trust funds and are just going to put their head in the sand and keep going.
Good for those people. That's the goal. One day I'm going to be just that person.
Let's all live for today. Yeah.
Must be nice.
I don't want to derail you, but a bit of a philosophical question here, though. Do you think that has to do with individual risk tolerance, or do you think that has to do purely with what your economic situation is as a buyer? Like, is there a cause to update your existing personas, or do you need to kind of throw it out and make new ones?
It's a really good question. And I think the answer is all of the above. And why I say that is I always find audience segmentation or persona development really dangerous to do by any one criteria, which is why I think, in marketing, we moved away from you're a 25 to 39-year-old, therefore you are this, or you're a 40 to 55-year-old, therefore you do this. And I think there's so many kind of, psychographics and risk tolerance, really good point, that goes into making up who those people are. So I think you're right. I buy into those 4 categories or those 4 segments. But in terms of what people look like within them, I think they're quite different. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's you may not even know who they are until they're in the sales center and you're having conversations with them. And so you're kind of, doing a bit of an assessment in the moment to understand what information does this person need to hear from me in order to, essentially continue the conversation.
We've done this a little bit with some of our home builder clients, and I think it's interesting because you almost have to look at, in some ways, it's a little bit of a sliding scale in terms of, who's buying what products. And we often talk about, moving down a category, when things are a little tighter and a little tougher, interest rates are higher. And then when things are a little bit easier and interest rates are lower and the economy is great, then maybe people move up a category. And I think there's a really interesting fit there too, where you're looking at your buyer personas, and maybe the product that persona was purchasing last year when things were extra hot is not the client that's buying that product this year. And you have to kind of take a look and make sure you're putting the right product in front of the right audience at the right time.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And that's where I think the production builders have an advantage over a custom builder, because they just have that diversity of product. Don't like this? What about this?
Yeah, and I think the product that was flying off the shelves, maybe last year when things were extra hot, isn't the product that, they should be pushing or are pushing today. Because, you've got to adjust that product, that mix, that marketing message to the audience and to the realities of their situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Rob, one more question before we get off this topic, which I think is helpful to address. Just, our listeners are primarily located in Alberta and Texas, and the one commonality that they share is that we are very much a resource-driven economy, and that tends to play out a little bit different in what is a quote-unquote normal economic fluctuation in the global market. So could you talk a little bit about how things might change for us resource-driven economies?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm not an economist. However, I actually heard an economist speak on exactly this, and I really liked his analogy, which he said, we're all entering choppy waters here over the next year, but resource-driven economies are kind of built in a different boat than some other economies. So, we might be a little bit better positioned. We might have a bigger boat. The waves might not lap over the sides. We might have the ability to weather the storm a little better, just based on, here in Alberta, we've got oil and gas, we have agriculture, we have things that are actually doing quite well right now, just based on what's happening externally around the world. That isn't always the case. There are also times in a resource-driven economy where we're feeling the pain where others aren't. And we can look back at even just a few years to understand that here. So yes, I do think that even using that word recession is dangerous, because it's not uniform across North America. It's not uniform across Canada. It's probably not even uniform across Alberta. I think different economies just feel it in different ways.
You mentioned it earlier, Rob, with the triggers are still happening. And especially when you see resource-driven economies, be it Alberta or Texas or others, doing well, you get a lot of migration, a lot of people moving in because, that's where the jobs are, or that's where the wages are, or anything like that.
It's a really good point. And what's interesting as a marketer too, is that you think about people migrating to your province or to your state. They're not coming with any brand equity or brand awareness. They might know a national builder. They might know somebody from afar, or they might be recommended to somebody. But really, you've got lots of people who are arriving on your doorstep, kind of a blank slate. And so I think that even considering that from a marketing perspective, and looking at your allocation of spend from brand, from more tactical or sales activation, and making sure that you're not ignoring one or the other. And I think re-looking at your marketing plan, re-looking at your consumer journey, re-looking at your tactical mix, is important to do every year. I think it's important to do around the economy and those third-party factors, and then it's also important to do around who is actually buying. And if all of those people are coming from out of market, that might really change how you're structuring your marketing program.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and just really all about, like we talked about before, just taking another look at your targeting and your audiences and who you're going after, because yeah, they could not be in your market. They could be out of market.
I think us marketers, we've all heard and we've read the stories about, during a really turbulent economy or during a recession or even a depression, don't turn off the marketing taps. Whatever you do, don't turn off the marketing taps. And there are a lot of case studies written about companies that have decreased or stopped their marketing spend versus those that didn't, or even increased their marketing spend. And sometimes the results of those decisions aren't noticed within the moment or even a year from now. It's coming out of the recession, and the delta between those two companies based on two very different decisions kind of continues to grow over time, and it's a gap that gets harder and harder to close. It's kind of like the older I get, if I take a couple of weeks off working out, it's a lot harder to get back into where I was. 2 weeks off might take me 4 weeks to get back. And I'm now relating homebuilder marketing to my fitness program.
Well, I mean, I always brand is an investment, right? And you get that compound interest when you keep investing over the years. And much like the stock market during a down period, like our good friend Warren Buffett always said, you have to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. And I think there's something to be said about your brand as an investment.
I think that's critical. And I think it's easy for us to say on this podcast. I think it's harder when you're, as a marketer, you're talking to your CFO or your CEO who are looking at a line item, which is marketing or media, seeing a large number and they're facing the pressure of having to cut costs. It appears like an easy cost to cut. And I think if you're valuing it at your marketing as an investment versus an expense and have that mindset, I think you're going to be better off in the long run. I think to that point, I think one thing through a recession that is critical, it's always critical, but even more so during times like this, is as a marketer, understanding how to talk to your CFO and your CEO, communicating those wins. It's not what you do, it's what you say you do. And so, having really strong metrics and measurement and real-time reporting so that you can walk into their office, justify the marketing spend, show the return on investment, even have a projected return on investment, and using language that isn't marketing language. It's CEO and CFO language, which is all about the dollars and the cents.
There's a lot of things that I want to unpack actually in what you talked about there, Rob. The first of all, I love your analogy on working out. Not sure if you're feeling that yourself, but I think it's a great analogy.
I am getting older, Jordan, and it is January. So you do the math.
Yeah. Everyone's in the gym right now because it's January. The other analogy that I love that, I think is just a really good visual for myself, and we've talked about this before, is the plane analogy. And just sort of the idea that, when you're flying at full speed at the right altitude, it's kind of easy to keep it there. There's not a lot you need to do to just sort of keep it in that zone. But as soon as you sort of take those things away and take off the gas, you're going to start to come down, and it's going to be slow, but it will come down. And so that's sort of like you're taking the fuel off the fire, you're taking the money away from the media spend, and you're going to lose altitude. And then when it comes back and, things are good again, and it's like, oh, now we got to go again. You got to spend a lot more. You got to put a lot more into getting that plane back up to that altitude, versus just sort of keeping it there. And, you make a great point, money's hard to come by and budgets are tight and things are more difficult. So, making the argument to be like, well, we just need to keep it at the same level because it's going to be good in the long run. That's a difficult one. But if you can, that's the best possible place you could be.
Absolutely. And I think to build on your analogy, because I've never met an analogy I didn't like to build on, is the idea of if you're sitting on that plane that's going down, look out the window and you're going to see another plane that's maintaining altitude, and that's your competitor. And if you think about a recession, and if you think about a shrinking buying pool, where do you maintain or where do you grow from? It's market share. And you now need to get more buyers away from your competitor than ever before. And that's why I say it's a marketer's market. And in order to do that, if they continue to invest into their marketing, and they might, as you say, just maintain altitude by keeping their pricing the same, their spend the same. But if you start to drop, you're gonna lose market share, and that's really, really tough to get back once you've started that slide.
Again, like you said, like if you are looking out the window and you see the competition there, and they are cruising at the same altitude, and you start to come down, you've now got a gap, and that's difficult. That's difficult to come back from.
And it can be self-perpetuating too, where if the gap grows, it becomes a lot harder to convince your CFO to spend into marketing when you're looking to cut more costs. So you kind of end up in this cutting cycle that can really, really hurt you for a long time to come. One thing I did want to talk about is, we've chatted a little bit about this, is your percentage of spend on brand versus sales activation, or brand versus tactical. And every marketing plan has kind of this mix between or should have this mix between the two of them. And if you think about your a really high level analogy would be, if you think about your consumer journey, awareness is kind of happening when they're living their lives. The trigger may not have happened yet. And you're trying to build your brand awareness so that when the trigger happens, whatever that may be, you're getting on the consideration list. And that lots of research has been done about how long the consideration list is for home building. But let's assume there's, the top 3 to 5 builders. And so you need to make sure that you are saying enough through your brand marketing to resonate with the consumer, or with your consumer, in order to end up on that list. And I don't know if I believe you guys have, but I don't know if your audience has ever heard of Les Binet and Peter Field. They wrote a book around the long and short of it, and really it's all about marketing and advertising effectiveness. And if you're ever to read a book about how to structure a marketing program to make sure it's effective, it's a really, really good one. And they talk a lot about the short-term effects of sales activation or tactical marketing versus the longer-term effects of brand building, and what that mix should be. It's hard. Every category is a little bit different, but they basically say about 60% of your effort and your funds should be spent on brand building efforts, and 40% should be spent on sales activation or tactical. And when the economy is good, you can nod along with that and be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm down. But when sales start to slip, or traffic, is a little bit lighter in the sales centers, there's this automatic reaction of, oh, I need to spend more on my tactical. I need to ramp up those really quick wins, get that sale this weekend so that I can, go back and justify more marketing expense. And it's a perfectly natural reaction. And sometimes it may even be the right reaction. But this is the biggest part of this recession proofing your marketing spend, is making sure you don't cut your brand building activities, because long-term growth only comes from brand building activities. And when we say brand, it's messaging, so it's that emotional connection to something that resonates with your audience, but it's also media. So think of your broader based media, where you're able to target people who might not currently be in the sales cycle. So it's the TVs, the radios, the out of homes, the pre-rolls. And, uh, over time, if you invest into both of those things, you're gonna see that investment pay off in the long run in a really, powerful way. And of course that's predicated on the fact that you're doing good work and you've got strong creative that is resonating with your audience. But if you do, there will be that payback over a longer period of time. Sales activation style or tactical based media has immediate payoff, but that immediacy fades extremely quickly just as soon as you see it. So it's like a heart rate monitor almost, where you see these spikes up and then those immediate spikes back down, either as soon as you pull out of market or as soon as maybe the market gets saturated with what you're trying to say. And a really effective marketing program finds the right balance between brand and sales activation. And that's what, Benet and Field really, talk about through their book. And I'm completely bought into it and think that, in terms of where people are at in the consumer journey, where they're at with their relationship with your brand, it depends on how you're speaking to them. And you need really the mix of both in order to talk to your audience in the right way at the right time.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time, and we talk to all of our clients about this mix of things all the time. Wonder, Rob, if you've got any thoughts around builders right now who are like, I got to sell houses today. Yes, the brand thing sounds great and for future, and I love it. But I got to sell some houses today. I don't want to cut the brand side of things, or, I'm being told I shouldn't cut the brand side of things. But I've also, let's say I'm a home builder marketer on the builder side, and I've only got so much money. So are there things that can be done to sort of save money and take steps to keep those things, but, move money around and use it in the best way?
Yes. Short answer, yes. And I think, really easy for us to sit on a podcast telling marketers, oh, you should just keep spending. It's all good. It'll pay off. Trust us. No, the reality is that you need to really analyze every decision that you're making. I think, from a creative point of view, perhaps the campaign that you ran last year is still resonating with audiences and still meeting people where they're at this year. So perhaps you don't invest in a new production budget and you rerun last year's creative. And the reality is the fatigue that you might be feeling as a marketer with your own creative is completely different than the fatigue that the market is feeling with their creative. And so dusting off last year's creative, you're saving dollars on additional production. B, you could either choose to, reinvest those dollars in different areas of your business or reinvest those dollars back into media channels. So you're really broadening your media mix and the opportunity to get your message out into the world. And then on the media side too, I think you can make decisions where you're almost, working smarter, not harder for your media decisions. So let's say, when times are good, you have a very large TV investment. Well, perhaps you look at a flighting strategy where you're not in market all the time, but you're kind of flighting in and out of market in a way that you're able to maintain awareness levels. Or perhaps you consider a reinvestment into, radio and out of home, which is always a really good 1-2 punch, especially in specific geographies. Or, investing into pre-roll versus television. You lose a little bit on awareness, but you certainly can reuse some of those broadcast assets in different ways or chop them up in different ways.
Yeah, I think that it's funny for us to sit here as an agency and say, what, don't worry about new creative, just buy media. But we're also here to make sure we're making the smartest recommendations for clients and what's going to be most effective and most valuable. And sometimes that is don't do new creative. And that's fine.
And I will toot our horn here for a minute. Just we have a lot of home builder clients within our agency. And we've seen them through recessions. It might not be right now, but throughout our history as an agency, we've seen plenty of home builders grow through recessions. And so, we are very empathetic to the challenges that our listeners are facing. But we also know what we're talking about a bit. And I think that that's important to mention because, yes, we are very empathetic to theory versus practice, but we know what we're talking about, hopefully.
Yeah, it's funny because I think I agree with you, Jordan. I think it's making the right decision, and certainly the right decision might be to not invest in creative or reinvest your dollars in other areas of your marketing. But I have a thought on that I'll get back to as well. But the other thing too is if you're just doing really average creative and you had something that maybe you weren't happy with or you didn't see results previously, the flip side is true as well. Like you do need to spend the money to make sure you've got something that's working as hard as possible for you because you are in a street fight for market share. And if you're bringing a spoon to a street fight when everyone else has sharpened knives, then it could be a tough one for you. One other thought that just occurred to me is the importance of the sales person or the sales experience through a recession. So again, if we think about that customer and meeting them where they're at, they're scrounging for value. So every sales center or experience that they have, they're looking to understand, okay, I have a set price. I now need to get a home that I can get the most value possible for this amount of money that the bank has told me that I'm able to spend. And I think it's human nature that if you were typically going to walk through one or two or three sales centers previously when times are good, now you're going to walk through 6 or 7 or 8 because you're trying to find where does this dollar best spent. And that's sometimes why that sales cycle is taking longer is there's this nervousness of, am I spending my money wisely? And okay, I just need to overturn one more rock in order to make sure that I have the confidence that yes, this is the exact right decision for me. So it's not that people aren't buying. I think there's just this nervousness around, their decision that they're making. And so if you think about people's mindset, then when they're walking into sales centers and they're having these interactions with the salespeople, I think rewriting your sales scripts is pretty important, and making sure that you have salespeople that are meeting people with empathy and understanding where they're at, but also having the ability to very quickly articulate value. Not talk about options, not show them maybe something that's going to add $30,000 to their purchase price, but really getting a feel for where they're at and hopefully tailoring a discussion specific to their needs.
No, I think you're bang on with that, Rob. And I think the value and empathy aspect of it for the sales team is super important. And it could even play out in your advertising, depending on your budgets and how you're approaching things strategically. But, meeting people where they're at and telling and talking to the story, it could even be either this home that you're looking at in this community, you can put a legal suite in the basement, or you can put one above the garage. And that's additional, revenue for yourself that you could use towards your mortgage. And there's even great options for when you're applying for your mortgage from the bank. If you've got something built in like a basement suite or an above the garage suite or whatever like that, the bank looks at those things and takes them into account when they're approving your mortgage. So I think it's also really understanding customers and how, as a salesperson, we can deliver other things of value that help make the sale.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, some of those sales practices that work well during a hot economy can really not work well in this economy. You kind of being that, a pushy or over aggressive salesperson, where you're trying to push urgency into a sale. And I get why a builder would want to have, push urgency into a sale. But I think the opposite is almost true here, where you're taking this, very understanding, empathetic of, what do you need now? I recognize you're here. What do you need so that I can help you get to here? And yeah, that's pretty critical.
Santana, do you remember, it was Chris in last episode, he talked about what a good salesperson is, and there was 3 things and I can't remember them all, but like, it's so true right now.
We're a counselor, an educator, and a guide.
We had a fantastic VP of sales on our podcast recently, Rob, and he was talking about that, which is good salespeople are educators, they're guides, they're empathetic, like they're just really good at reading people because, what is just a number for you, as you've mentioned, is the biggest purchase of their life. And money brings up a lot of weird feelings in people. And you kind of have to have a lot of patience for some of the weirdness that might come. So to your point, really communicating with your sales team and dare I say it, maybe changing some of their incentives around or whatever that looks like. Because if you're pushing them to sell quickly, to close quickly, and it's going against what might be best for your brand, like there are things to evaluate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Money brings out the weird in people. I think that is, I think that's very true. And there's almost this counterintuitiveness too. If you're confident in your value equation, you could even push your customers to go out and check out other competitors. Like, here are all the things we include. Now go sniff around, and please come back and talk to me when you've done so. And hopefully, we're able to show you the value that we've built into our price or into our homes is just different. And I think that's where builders can really differentiate themselves in that competitive set as you battle for market share.
Yeah, Rob, the last thing I wanted to unpack with from what you were covering at the beginning was the idea of metrics and how metrics can be used to support, your arguments and your fight for budget. Maybe it's a fight, maybe it's not. With your marketing directors, your VP marketing, your presidents, your CEOs, et cetera. So maybe speak a little bit to how metrics can play a role in supporting your arguments and, or maybe even some of the things that don't help in those arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Jordan. What I was saying earlier is just making sure that whoever is holding your purse strings, let's assume it's the CEO or your CFO, making sure that you have an open dialogue on a regular basis with them on the value of marketing and the return on investment that you're seeing with your marketing. And in order to have that dialogue, you need data to inform, your arguments. And in terms of the right data to have, I think it's having, real-time attribution on your marketing spend. And what we mean by that, attribution is one of those terms that us marketers throw around. But really what we're looking to understand is what actions that your audience or consumers are making are attributed back to your marketing activities. And I think that there's, in a recessionary environment, there's a concern that I would have if you're only looking at last touch attribution, you may fall into the trap of, okay, well, it looks like only my tactical media is working for me. Therefore, we should shift all of our marketing into our tactical spend. And that's the danger of really, landing where I talked about with those kind of, short-term sales activation media, where over time you'll erode your brand. So I think attribution is critical, but it's also looking at what is the return on investment of kind of my sales activation media, and then what is the return on investment over a longer period of time on my brand. And you may want to invest in some brand research. If you do that annually, maybe even look at it quarterly, so that you're just noticing that you're not slipping or sliding a little bit from a brand perspective, so that you have actionable data that you can take to support an investment, not only into your sales activation media, but also your brand media as well.
Awesome. Rob, final question for you. What would be, I guess, your number one piece of advice that you could give to, our audience who's sitting and listening to this and thinking, okay, That all sounded great. What would be your one biggest piece of advice to them today?
It's going to sound repetitive because I've hit on it a little bit over the last while, which is, I think it's twofold. Making sure your brand is very well articulated and differentiating from your competitive set. And then two, that you continue to invest into it.
Awesome. Well, I know I learned a lot, as I always do, chatting with you two. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with us all about something that we hope never comes to fruition. Hopefully the clouds start to form and it just rains money again. But in case it doesn't, we've got this episode. So thanks, Rob.
Thank you both. And I think there's a lot of things we talked about here that are just good marketing practices. And maybe it takes a lumpy economy to kind of force us to pay attention a little bit more to some of the things we should have been paying attention to all along. So thank you both.
Yeah, it's a great point. Good way to end, Rob. Good. We'll end it on that note.
Thanks, Rob.
Always fun talking to Rob about everything to do with strategy, and especially when it comes into more difficult markets. So I thought that was a great episode. Takeaways. I think my biggest takeaway from today's episode, I loved when we were talking about your audiences and your targeting. I think it's easy to just sort of fall into the trap of going after the same people in the same way and maybe, trying to work harder with more or changing your messaging. I think going after the same people in the same way, and you try and pour more onto that same fire. But what you should look at is, how's that changed? Like, how has the audience changed? There's one builder specifically that we work with that I'm thinking about. We always talk about moving up and moving down. As the economy changes, as people's confidence and buying power change, we look at how the audience moves up and moves down, and we target differently based on the fact that that product that person was buying last year is maybe not the product they're buying this year. And so what product are we serving to them in more of those activation ads, and how are we juggling all of that to make sure that we're giving the best value product to the customer for what they could buy at the time. So I think that conversation about audience and targeting and triggers and things was very important, and something that absolutely every builder should be looking at through 2023.
Totally agree, Jordan. I think my biggest takeaway, especially as a content marketer, is that I'm very focused on bottom of the funnel, very focused on conversion. I'm a hammer, so everything looks like a nail in the marketing world. But that brand awareness is so important, even if it's harder to measure. And I think that is something worth taking into account when we get into these fluctuating economies, because just because you can't measure it doesn't mean, or just because it's harder to measure doesn't mean that it's not critical. So there's a bit of a leap of faith involved, but that leap of faith is what's going to put you further ahead in the long run. And we've seen this time and time again with clients. And, even to pull back the curtain a little bit on this podcast, we don't do as good of a job measuring it as we could, but I feel like anecdotally we've had more conversations with home builders this past year that we've been doing it than we've ever had before. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about brand awareness and just putting your values out there.
Yeah, definitely.
This has been Build Up, a ZGM podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe on your favorite listening app. Thanks to Shelby, our editor, Santana, our executive producer, Scott for our original music, and you for listening along. Be sure to follow us on your favorite social platform at Build Up Podcast.